Medical innovation starts with medical discussion. Talking about the future and what comes next with Project Medtech.
Hello, everybody. I'm Lindsay Deneen, Director of Marketing and Engagement at Project Medtech, and welcome to another episode of the Project Medtech podcast. If we can help you in any way, or you would like to suggest a future guest, you can email us at info@projectmedtech.com. If conversations like this are helpful, that's exactly why we bring people together at our signature events, the Midwest Showcase, the Startup Symposium, and Coming to America. For more on our events that include networking, education, and pitch competitions for startups, check them out at www.projectmedtech.com. We even have sponsorship options if your company is also dedicated to accelerating medical technology to impact patient lives. So reach out today to get involved. The Project Medtech podcast is proudly sponsored by Ward Law. Ward Law Office, LLC is a boutique law firm specializing in the practice of patent and trademark law. They are committed to providing inventors, entrepreneurs, and businesses of all types with personal and professional services and are flexible to meet your unique needs. It is their goal to both educate on how to secure valuable patent and trademark protection and to provide high-quality services at rates affordable to independent inventors, startups, and small businesses alike. Without further ado, let's dive in.
Okay, Malcolm, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, Malcolm, let's start with an introduction to who you are, your background, and what you currently do at WashU.
Sure. Have a bit of an eclectic background. So I'm currently my title is Innovation Fund Manager at Washington University of St. Louis in the Office of Technology Management. But basically, I oversee the technology development function within WashU's Office of Technology Management. So education-wise, I have a bachelor's in mechanical engineering from Missouri S&T. And started my career doing project management work. Then went back to school and got an MBA from Indiana University's Kelley School of Business. And so I actually concentrated in entrepreneurship and marketing in that program. And then once I earned my MBA, went back in the industry, worked in product management primarily, mostly in the industrial product companies. So it was a really good learning experience. They like to pitch product management as sort of being an entrepreneur within a company. It's not quite like that, but it was a very good experience having that P&L responsibility, oversight of a product line, making pricing decisions, interacting with customers, things of that nature, getting involved in new product development. And then I did a short stint in management consulting to basically do change management and process improvement work, which was another really good learning experience. And then was able to make the transition into tech transfer at Missouri S&T, working there for 10 years in their tech transfer and economic development office. Before being recruited to St. Louis University's tech transfer office, serving as an associate director for technology commercialization. And while I was at SLU, I went ahead and earned my PhD in public and social policy, really focused on technology transfer policy and science policy. And then about February 2023, made the move over to WashU, basically to set up the WashU Gap Fund and get that up and running and operating. And so I've been overseeing that. And in the past few years, we've sort of been thinking about how the office is structured, how we go about doing technology commercialization. And so that what started off as a focus on the WashU Gap Fund is sort of expanded into this function of technology development and being more strategic about developing the technology further.
Yeah. I want to get into the Gap Fund and how you've structured that. But first, so you grew up in Missouri then.
Yep.
How far? What are we talking about from geographically? So again, I think listeners are 60 to 65% North American, US, Canada based. The rest are international. So how far is Missouri S&T to St. Louis? Is this
Yeah.
close in the state of Missouri or?
Well, I'm in St. Louis, and so
Right.
S&T is about 100 miles southwest of St. Louis.
Oh, gotcha.
So
Okay.
it's actually close enough that I actually commuted for 10 years.
Really?
So it was an
No
extreme
kidding.
commute. But
Yeah.
I actually
Yeah.
did that for 10 years.
Okay. Yeah, very cool. All right. And then I think maybe just laying some of the land here for the St. Louis ecosystem. I know of WashU University, in St. Louis, which is super deceiving because I think of the state of Washington. But I know of it because it has a physical therapy school, and my wife is a physical therapist, so I think she might have applied and gotten into WashU, but ultimately stayed in Ohio. But regardless, WashU in St. Louis, is it a big university, small university? Talk to me a little bit about what WashU is known for.
Yeah, it's a private university, fairly significant. WashU does about $1 billion worth of research with the
Wow.
NIH, and so there's a lot of research going on here. Very closely affiliated with the BJC, Barnes Jewish Healthcare System, and so education wise and innovation wise, it's a major player here within the ecosystem, sort of one of the anchors here. Uh, so most of the research in terms of disclosures that we see come out of the medical school or the School of Medicine. And so I would say that's probably, 70, 80% in terms of disclosures that we're seeing, if I were to ballpark it. But we also have a very active engineering department with a biomechanical um, field of discipline. And so we see activities there. There's the regular School of Arts and Sciences with chemistry and all of that. And so does research
Mhm.
there. So there's a lot of research going on. And so as an institution, WashU is very connected to other partners within the ecosystem, such as BioSTL and BioGenerator. So the Office of Technology Management actually works fairly closely with those organizations. But within the ecosystem, obviously there are other universities here that are doing research, and they
Mhm.
have other programs that are occurring within the area. So, Cortex as an innovation district has developed quite a bit over the last 10 years. So, WashU has a strong presence there. It's right next to the medical campus. And so we're really integrated there as well. And then within the St. Louis ecosystem, there are other institutions like T-Rex that sort of evolved over time. There are other programs that are providing mentoring, particularly around entrepreneurship and innovation as well.
Yeah, super cool. Um, and your role there, the Gap Fund, which I want you to explain the setup of this here, but um, it could be more than just life sciences, is that right? Or is
Exactly.
yours? Okay, all right,
Oh,
got it.
so
Okay,
the way we set up the Gap Fund, it really focuses on anything that's non-drug or non-therapeutic. Um, we set it up particularly because we thought all these other areas weren't getting the support that they really needed. And there weren't as many opportunities. When people think of tech, they tend to think of biotech a lot, and that's a very active area here in the St. Louis ecosystem. And so that tends to get a lot of focus. It tends to suck up a lot of the oxygen in the room. So we set up the Gap Fund to specifically provide support to all these other areas. And so it's very broadly defined as supporting any non-drug, non-therapeutic technology across the WashU community. But we hope to be able to expand that support into some of the therapeutics and the drugs in the future going forward.
Yeah, very cool. Awesome. So tell me a little bit about the Gap Fund, because I think, one of the things is we've seen a number of different ways that local universities create innovation departments and tie into the community and do these sorts of things. And we've talked a handful of times, and I wasn't aware that what your PhD was actually in, but you've obviously seen some of this as well and studied this. So tell me about how it's set up, how it's structured, why it's unique, and maybe talk a little bit about the innovation ecosystem that WashU's created.
Sure. So when we set up the WashU Gap Fund, we made some very specific choices. And one of them was that the fund wouldn't make investments in new ventures. It would focus pretty narrowly on the technology itself. And so all of the awards are given to the faculty in their role as employees of the university. And so what they're working within the fence line of WashU. And we did that to really avoid a lot of the conflict of interest issues that may come up when you're trying to use a new business venture or startup as the vehicle for a lot of things. But it also gave us a bit more control over the process. And so with the Gap Fund, we're really focused on trying to understand what's necessary to make the technology competitive versus other solutions in the market, really achieving product market fit, and really what's necessary to attain widespread adoption. And so again, we're very focused on the technology itself, and we set it up where we disperse the funding sort of in tranches built around the work plan and certain key triggers or milestones as we work along and do projects. So for example, project you worked on where we were doing market access and reimbursement analysis. So structuring that so the disbursement was cover the initial invoice for where it got started, and then another distribution once the project was complete and we got the deliverables and then make another disbursement. And so that gives us control to make sure the money is being spent strategically, the way it should be spent, and really enables us to really get involved with the projects, and really help structure them and focus on the important things in terms of commercialization, which generally speaking, a lot of the programs that are, proof of concepts or Gap Fund type programs are sort of moving in the direction of being very involved, taking a very hands-on approach, having a little more control over the process as we go forward. So in that sense, we're not that unusual, but in terms of the focus on the technology and really not funding ventures per se, that's I think is pretty unique. But we do work really closely with the new ventures team, that is again part of the Office of Technology Management, and their mandate is really to work with the faculty that are pursuing new business ventures to commercialize their technologies and help them think about all the other things around that, with the business model, the revenue strategy, the channels, and all of those other things. So they bring all of that together. And so within the ecosystem, there is that support, but the Gap Fund, we've made pretty narrowly focused on some things. It makes it a bit easier to manage and a bit easier to achieve what we're trying to do with the Gap Fund in terms of the desired outcomes we're trying to accomplish here.
Yeah. And I think, I told you that before the call as well, is I was really impressed with the first company we worked with on that reimbursement assessment in terms of what they already had accomplished, in not just reimbursement, but the other areas of their business, even though it's not a business yet, right? They're funding the product. you still can control their startup and business readiness so that when they do spin out, they are really ready to take on capital. I mean, that is generally a pretty big issue we see is when we have companies that are spinning out of other universities, are they really ready to take on and answer those economic benefits that they're providing to the healthcare system, whether it be payers, providers, clinicians, patients, or all four. Those economic things are just hard. The merger of that with regulatory is difficult, and I just don't think enough early stage innovators are thinking about that. And so the fact that you can have some of that control to kind of push them down that route, I think is really key and leads to probably really mature companies going to the new venture team, and then being able to kind of pick that up where you guys left it off. What are, in your experience, these early stage innovators, what are some of the biggest things they struggle with when they come to you?
Yeah, so in my experience, it's really hard for them to separate the research from the business and make that transition. Um, they really tend to hone in on that research and focus on what science needs to be done, what type of science needs to be done, and that type of research. The way we've set up the Gap Fund, we're really able to slow them down, and everyone talks about doing customer discovery. But again, a lot of the grants that they have access to, that's really not a component of the grants, and they can't fund it. And doing customer discovery takes quite a bit of effort, and it's a real skill that has to be developed. And again, the faculty aren't trained to do that, and they're really not prepared. They have all this other things on the plate. So with the Gap Fund and the way we've set it up, it really enables them to want to do the customer discovery, and so we can really force that issue to have them do customer discovery on the front end to really engage and think about who are really the target users and understanding what is the job and the problem from their perspective and what are they really looking for in terms of the desired outcomes going forward and how they approach their job, and particularly how this technology might integrate within the clinical care workflow. And so we're able to really, nudge them along to do that customer discovery work. And the way we've done this now is that we really pair them up with a service provider that has that expertise in doing customer discovery. And so they work with them to define who that target user is and make sure that's correct, work on the screeners, the dialogue, but the actual moderation, they leave to that consultant while they're observing the interviews themselves. And then there are debrief sessions where they can talk about, okay, what came up, what type of issues, what adjustments do we need to make in terms of how we're doing these discussions. And going through that process really, opens their eyes up, and it either gives clarity on some things that they were thinking or, refutes some assumptions that they were making going into the project. So great example is we have one faculty that's working on some Internet of Things technology, gateway manager. And so going into it, he was operating under the assumption that real-time data access was going to be important to the target users that he had envisioned for this and some other things. But going through that customer discovery process and sitting in on those interviews really became apparent that really wasn't the key issue. There were some other key issues that were really more important. And so that real-time data access wasn't really part of the minimum feature set. And so had he not gone through that customer discovery experience, he would have gone down a path of really trying to optimize real-time data access but it wouldn't really be creating value in making the technology competitive for a marketplace. And so it's that type of thing. It's very subtle, but it's really important because it really informs how the technology needs to be further developed and structured and formulated to bring it to the market. And even how you go about talking about it with target customers.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
A great example. Let me ask you about the creation of the team here, right? Because it's one thing to have the process, have, the funds set up appropriately. Okay, good. We like the strategy of how we're going to do this, and we're going to move companies through and hand them off. And obviously, there's plenty of innovation happening at WashU. So it's like you have all the ingredients. How do you get the team to execute the plan now? Because that's the other big piece of this is a lot of ecosystems and universities will put together these really good plans, and there's only so much planning you can do and so many different
Right.
things you can do, and it comes down to execution. So talk to me a little bit about that, because we got some engagement with that. Yeah, when we did our project with Beacon AI, and we were really impressed with the internal WashU team as well that was working on helping the innovator through the process and build these things out. And so, yeah, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that and how you looked at building that team.
Yeah. So the research team is developed on their own, however they come together and however they come to us. That's how we take them. There may be instances where we're evaluating a potential project and we're thinking, okay, they really need to have an advisor here that has certain commercialization experience, a certain commercial experience within this domain, because that's really what's missing. And so we'll either connect them in some way or try to help them connect. But the other nice thing is that within the New Ventures team, that we have an EIR program, Entrepreneur in Residence. So for those that are considering going through the process of launching a new business venture, there's the opportunity to try and connect them with an EIR that can help play that role. We also have this New Venture Fellows program that operates out of the New Ventures team. And so every year for the past couple of years, we've been able to have, 4 or 5 or so fellows that are learning about entrepreneurship and technology entrepreneurship, learning about, business models and the value propositions and relevant frameworks, but then being able to apply what they're learning on real projects. And so you take that type of assistance and apply it to these projects and have them work with the researchers and our research team to answer some of these questions. And so, for example, the project you worked on, Bryce Sotomayor, came out of that program. He's since been hired on with the Office of Technology Management. And so he, was assigned to work with, that particular technology. In this case, we're talking about Dr. Raj Dar, excuse me, and his technology for predicting malignant edema, strokes. And so, so now there's an extra resource to dig into some of these questions, these unknowns we might have. And then in that case, it was around some of the market access and reimbursement where he can do some early work. So Raj and his team, having gone through the initial customer discovery work to understand what was going on with the customer and the customer's perspective, and really understand where the opportunity was to create value, and confirming some things, then actually going through an FDA regulatory analysis and going through the process of engaging with the FDA through the Q submission process to get specific definitive feedback before they start down the road of doing validation or anything of that nature. And so as they go through that, then the issues of market access and reimbursement came up and said, okay, well, now let's connect them with another resource to help think through those issues. And that's when Project Medtech comes into the picture to help work through those issues. And so, again, it's really fairly tailored to the individual opportunity. It's not one standard team plug, you just move it along to the next. But the one thing that really makes all the difference, no matter what, is really the coachability of the researcher and the research team. And so we see it anecdotally. We haven't done any hard data on this, but we do get a sense that in those instances where the researchers are really coachable, meaning they take feedback in, they engage, they're not defensive, they're really trying to understand what the issues are and adjust accordingly. And going through that process really actively, when they're coachable, the outcomes are a lot better. The process goes a lot smoother. And so if there is only one, factor that I could use to try and make a decision about whether or not a technology or a gap fund project is going to be, quote, successful or unsuccessful, it would be coachability, without a doubt. That would be the one factor that seems to be the most predictive.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I mean, we see it all the time with technical founders that struggle with the clinical. You have to have clinical validation beyond just does your device work or not. You have to have clinical validation around the economic impact you're creating. And I think that's just like I don't know if it's like a difficult place or a difficult piece for them to talk about, but generally you're working with clinicians, scientists, and engineers, and healthcare is about saving lives and improving lives, but it's also a business, and there's that unsexiness of having to talk about that business aspect. And I think some of these clinicians probably struggle with a little bit, and that coachability of, hey, I know how this product is going to get used in the clinics. And it's like, hey, we know that, but we still got to talk to other people.
And that's really one of the most dangerous assumptions they can make. That's one of the red flags to me. I talked about one slide, the factor that's the biggest green light in coachability. The biggest red flag is that assumption that I know what's best for the target user. And I understand how they can come to that because they are experts in their field. They've been doing this for a long time. They have a lot of knowledge. They do know a lot. But there's always the potential for expert blindness and thinking that expertise in one area automatically translates into expertise in another area. And that's just not the case. And a lot of times what I like to say is, there's always a possibility that you might be the outlier, in terms of if you're an innovator, creating technology for the field that you actually do clinical practice work for. There is the possibility that, even though you're part of that target user group, you might actually be the outlier in the target user in terms of how you're using it, how you're thinking about it, the job to be done. And so it's very dangerous to try and generalize from your own personal experience to the broader market. And so another way to think about it is, okay, great. You think one thing, or you have this particular assumption about how the user will apply the technology or how the technology is going to be used in a situation. Okay, prove it. You're a scientist. Prove it to me. And that's where some of the discovery work comes in, because that's how you test the assumption and prove or disprove or whether the assumption is valid.
Yeah, it's funny. I recorded another podcast this morning, and someone was talking about, one of the guests was talking about that this morning of, customer discovery. and he was describing the scientific method, and I'm like, imagine that the scientific method actually works, you know. So let me ask you this: how does WashU then, in this customer discovery piece, partner with other hospitals, universities, you know, to do some of this customer discovery? Because to your point, what might be right for your health system and your ecosystem that might just be unique to your health system or that
Right.
physician. And so how do you pressure test that with other geographies across the US or world?
Well, when we structure these engagements, we specifically specify that the respondents should not be part of the WashU community or the Bone
Ah,
community. So they should be from outside. They shouldn't be close colleagues of the inventors. And so with those directions, then um, the consultant and the researchers, as they're working on the project, they try and find respondents outside of the area and try to get a general broad geographic representation and maybe representation across different categories of types of institutions, things of that nature, to try and make sure we're getting a fairly broad sort of representative sample in terms of the feedback that we're getting. And again, it's not meant to be to the degree where we can get, statistical significance at a, p-value of 0.001 or anything like that. It's really more qualitative and trying to get the qualitative sense. Okay, are we on the right track? What kind of issues are coming up that we haven't thought about? And really, an opportunity to try and discover what the unknown unknowns are, the things that can really hurt you that you hadn't thought about and it doesn't even cross your mind to consider. And you can really only get that by going out and engaging with the customers and target users and having those initial discussions through customer discovery and having a true discussion and not try and sell your technology in the conversation.
yeah,
Another important point.
yeah. Um, so let's expand back out to kind of the St. Louis ecosystem as a whole. Um, you know, outside of winning the second most World Series titles in Major League Baseball, um, uh, what are some of the things that you know St. Louis's ecosystem does well, and what are some things that could use a little bit of could use more of? And I think like when I think of this, I think of like, yeah, how's the funding environment? I'm assuming healthcare wise, you have good engagement through payers and obviously hospital systems, innovation. But yeah, what are the things they do well? What are the things they could use more support on?
I think as an entire ecosystem, St. Louis has really done well in becoming a player with regard to biosciences and biotechnology,
Okay.
and really establishing itself there. Is gaining ground in terms of the investment opportunities
Okay.
for the venture
Yeah.
investments opportunities. We do have some local venture capital firms. Um, and, with the example with the new ventures teams, they're very active in trying to make those connections with the venture capital community more broadly nationwide, to make those connections as well. But again, that's still an area where I think locally we could stand to improve a little bit more. And I think the other challenge that we have a lot in the local ecosystem is finding those initial C-level leaders to come on board to startups and help them at that very early stage. Again, we have these really technical founders and co-founders who are researchers at heart. And that's really the other piece that they really need is that initial CEO that has that experience and background to come in and step in and work with them and really pilot the venture. And so I think that's a piece that we kind of struggle with. It's one of the reasons why OTM sort of set up the Entrepreneur in Residence program to try and sort of fill that void. But I think that's a very big gap. I think some of the other exciting opportunities we see coming along locally in the ecosystem, SLU is a competitor and a partner, so to speak. So another major research institution here, recently became an R1 research institution, but they focused on really the geospatial domain, geospatial technology. And so with the recent investment from NGA and, building a whole new infrastructure facility for their operations in North St. Louis, that was I think a big boost, not just to the economic situation in North St. Louis, but just generally to the broader innovation entrepreneurship ecosystem here locally. And so that creates, opportunities for other cutting edge technology, and for, St. Louis to really, make a mark within a specific technology domain. And so, again, I think there are lots of opportunities here, but the main struggles, again, funding, making improvements there, but there's an opportunity to really make more improvement and make things a little bit easier. But I would say probably that C-level experience in finding that CEO to get started is probably still a big impediment for ventures, particularly those that are going to be pursuing venture capital investment.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. The funding piece, it's like I think it's been getting better across the ecosystems that aren't Boston, New York, and San Francisco, where
Right.
money seems to just kind of fall out of pockets, right? I do think though, it's like if local communities can solve for that early stage, let's seed a lot of these companies, those growth stage venture funds will find good companies. And frankly, the valuations are better in some of these other areas, right? And so, that's the hope, but you still need those growth stage venture funds as well that can come in and that are local to a community, that can fund, some of these opportunities as well. So yeah, I totally agree. I think the executive level, finding enough jockeys for these horses is just generally a problem. And so, that's great insights. Okay. Final questions here. If there was one thing an early stage innovator would need to know about the U.S. healthcare system, you've littered a lot of really good advice for them. But if there's one thing where it's like, hey, I'm thinking about innovating specific to the U.S. healthcare system, what's that one piece that I need to know heading into that?
Oh, yeah. Well, it kind of centers around the one assumption that I see a lot of researchers making, that if I get clinical validation or get the approval from FDA, all is fine. That's the biggest hurdle, and it's getting what's called market access, and getting payers to agree to pay for use of the technology is another hurdle, an incredibly challenging hurdle, that they really need to be aware of and need to understand that when it comes to data and validating a technology, there's different types of data and different types of validation. And so what may be needed to validate for the FDA or for clear requirements might be completely different than what they need to validate for market access and reimbursement and to convince payers to pay for technology. And that may be different. Both of those may be different from what you really need to convince the customer or the target user that the technology is worth adopting, you know. And so they need to be cognizant of that and how all of that plays together, interconnects, and understanding that and going through this process, starting off with customer discovery, engaging with the FDA early to understand regulatory considerations, and then thinking about market access and reimbursement issues early on, doesn't hurt. It helps you, and it will in some ways play into how you go about doing that scientific work that you want to do to mature the technology, refine it, and advance it going forward. And so I know a lot of researchers want to jump in and do that work first, but that's really, in my opinion, putting the cart before the horse, and you really need to do these other pieces first, and be cognizant of the differences and nuance between the three sort of sets of data and validation that you really need to do.
The one of my favorite phrases as of recent is the FDA doesn't buy your medical device.
Right.
And the people need to understand that. Okay. Obviously, judging, you see in my background, I enjoy reading. I get most of my books from my guests. It could be fiction or nonfiction. It doesn't have to be nonfiction. Most people tendency to give me nonfiction books. And so, it's the first time I finally read Multipliers. I'm listening to that audiobook, and I'm currently reading Science Lessons, which is a book about Amgen. It's pretty good. Book recommendation or two if you have one.
Yeah, I'll give you two, one in each category. So
Okay.
in fiction, I would recommend a book that came out fairly recently called James by Percival Everett. It is a sort of retelling, reimagining of Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. And I thought it was really well done. Really interesting, really well done. With some interesting twists in it. So if you're familiar with the Huckleberry Finn story, if you read that, in high school or grade school and anything like that, I think you'll find this a really interesting read, really engaging.
Very cool. Awesome. I have it pulled up here now. I'm just, looking at it. Okay. Very good. Yep.
And the other one I would recommend is Bernoulli's Fallacy. And I forget who the author is. I read this a while ago, and I think it's been a while since it was published. But it's about statistics and this sort of feud between the traditional frequentist statistics and Bayesian statistics. And so it sort of gets into that and sort of delves into what the author considers to be some fundamental flaws with frequentist statistics and that methodology, which we know is really predominant in our sciences and research. That's the dominant statistical method that's used in science today. And so if you're into that more technical things, I think that would be a really interesting read for you as well.
It's by Aubrey Clayton. I looked it up here. Very cool. I appreciate it, Malcolm. Malcolm, thanks for doing this. We'll have a link to your LinkedIn, the website, around WashU, gap fund information, that sort of thing. Thanks so much for joining me today. Hang on for 1 minute and we'll chat offline.
Great.
Hi, I'm Freddie Coffey, Director of Marketing at Jumpstart. The Project Medtech podcast is proudly sponsored by Jumpstart Inc. Jumpstart's Trailblazer Accelerator helps Ohio's most innovative early-stage health tech startups fast-track their growth with tailored advising from serial entrepreneurs non-dilutive funding to fuel their journey, and unrivaled access to a network of experts, resources, and investment opportunities. Whether it's improving patient outcomes, advancing digital health, or reimagining care delivery, Jumpstart provides the high-impact services and critical resources to bring big ideas to life. Learn more at jumpstartinc.org/startups.
Thank you for listening. At our core, we at Project Medtech are networkers, educators, and consultants. We meet you where you are to bring value and to create impact. We care deeply about helping medtech companies succeed right from the start, through to exit, by providing consulting and fractional services, hosting impactful industry events, and of course, sharing incredible guest insights like the ones you heard today through our podcast. Please reach out at any time if we can be of assistance. Check out our website at www.projectmedtech.com or email us at info@projectmedtech.com.